Somewhere in this very moment, there is someone lying awake in the middle of the night, staring at a phone screen, unable to quiet their thoughts. Maybe it is 2 a.m., maybe later, and they are carrying a burden they have never shared with anyone, a regret they keep hidden, a fear they cannot explain, a question they are too afraid to ask out loud. And while that person is scrolling through endless content, searching for something they may not even know they need, a simple message is quietly reaching people all over the world. It is not a video filled with expensive production, dramatic effects, or carefully designed moments meant to capture attention. There is no celebrity appearance, no powerful soundtrack forcing emotion, and no complicated presentation. It is simply a priest sitting in front of a camera, sharing a message about divine mercy in a way that feels unexpectedly personal. A message so direct and so simple that people stop scrolling. They listen, and somehow, those few minutes begin reaching people exactly when they feel they need them most. Within only a short period of time, the clip began spreading rapidly. Thousands of people started sharing it, and the comment sections became something very different from what is normally seen under online religious content. People were not just leaving quick reactions or polite messages. They were opening up. They were telling stories. They were admitting struggles they had carried silently for years. Again and again, the same kinds of words appeared. I needed this today. I was close to giving up. How did this find me at exactly the right moment? For many viewers, it felt less like they had discovered a random video and more like they had encountered a message that somehow met them at the exact point of their deepest need. And that is what makes a message rooted in divine mercy so powerful. It does not depend on trends. It does not require impressive presentation. It does not need a famous person attached to it. A message that speaks truthfully about hope, forgiveness, and restoration can reach people because it connects with something deeper than entertainment. It reaches the part of human beings that longs to believe they are not beyond repair. The teaching behind this viral moment was not actually new. It was connected to a spiritual message that began decades earlier through the writings of a Polish nun named Sister Faustina, whose small and simple diary would eventually influence millions of people around the world. What makes this story remarkable is that something written in a quiet convent many years ago found new life through a short online video, reaching a generation struggling with guilt, anxiety, comparison, and hopelessness. This is not simply the story of a video becoming popular. It is the story of why a message about mercy continues to find people in moments when they feel most distant from hope. It is about why a teaching written decades ago still speaks so clearly today. And perhaps most importantly, it raises a question for anyone watching right now. What if finding this message was not just another random moment of scrolling? Because the heart of this story is not really about a viral clip. The video is only the doorway. The deeper message is about a door that has been open for a long time, waiting for people who believe they are too far away to return. So what exactly did this message say, and why did it affect so many people? It began in the most ordinary way possible. There was no major announcement, no carefully planned campaign, and no strategy designed to create internet attention. Someone simply uploaded a short recording of a talk about divine mercy. It was the type of message that had been shared for years in churches, retreats, and small gatherings. Nothing about it appeared designed for massive attention. But something about the timing, the language, and the way the message was presented caused it to connect with people in a way nobody expected. Soon, the comments started changing. Instead of simple reactions, people began sharing personal experiences. One person explained that they had been thinking about abandoning their faith completely, but this was the final message they watched before deciding not to walk away. Another person shared that they had avoided returning to church for more than 10 years because they carried deep shame over something from their past. They believed they had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. Another person wrote only a few words, "I don't believe in coincidences anymore." To understand why a short teaching could create such a response, it is important to understand what the message was actually saying. It was not a message focused only on rules. It was not telling people that they needed to become perfect before approaching God. It was not about proving themselves worthy through effort, discipline, or religious performance. In fact, the message presented almost the opposite idea. It was centered on the belief that divine mercy is not something earned after someone becomes good enough. It is something offered precisely because people are broken, struggling, and in need of healing. In need of healing. This idea comes from the spiritual writings of Sister Faustina, a young Polish nun who recorded what she believed were encounters with Christ during the 1930s. Her writings repeatedly returned to one central theme: mercy. The message she recorded challenged a common image many people quietly carry about God, an image of God as a distant judge, watching from far away, keeping track of mistakes, measuring failures, and waiting to see whether someone has done enough to deserve forgiveness. But the message of divine mercy presents a different picture. It describes God not as someone standing far away with crossed arms, but as someone who moves toward the person who is suffering. Like a parent running toward a child who has fallen, the focus is not on asking whether the child deserves help before offering it. The focus is on the child's need. That image became one of the strongest parts of the viral teaching because it challenged the way many people think about their own relationship with God. Why did this message connect so strongly at this particular moment in history? The answer is found in the emotional reality many people are experiencing today. The world has become more connected than ever through technology, yet countless people feel more isolated than previous generations. Anxiety, loneliness, and emotional exhaustion have become common experiences for millions. People constantly compare their lives with carefully edited versions of other people's lives online. They see success, happiness, and confidence everywhere around them while privately struggling with feelings of failure. Into that environment came a message with a simple but powerful statement: you are not beyond mercy. You are not too damaged to be restored. You are not the one person who cannot be forgiven. You are exactly the kind of person mercy exists for. And for many people, those words reached a place that had been ignored for years. One particular idea from the message seemed to remain with people long after they finished watching the video. It was the idea that no matter how many times someone falls, no matter how long they have been away, and no matter what they believe makes them impossible to forgive, the response from divine mercy is not rejection. It is an invitation to return. Many viewers described how different this felt from the way they had learned to think about God. Some had grown up hearing constant reminders about sin, consequences, and judgment, but they had never fully understood how those truths existed alongside mercy. They knew the words that said God was loving, but deep inside they carried an image of someone who was always disappointed in them. The video challenged that image. It did not ignore sin or pretend that human actions do not matter. Instead, it made a distinction that many people had never considered before. The seriousness of a wound does not make a healer less willing to help. In fact, the greater the injury, the more urgently healing is needed. A doctor who understands how serious an illness is does not walk away from the patient. The seriousness of the condition is exactly why treatment becomes more important. In the same way, the message explained that human brokenness is not a reason to run away from mercy, it is the reason mercy exists. That change in perspective completely altered the emotional direction of the message. Instead of guilt pushing people further into hiding, guilt became the very thing that could lead them toward healing. Shame tells people to disappear. Shame convinces people that they should hide their failures, avoid being seen, and keep their struggles locked away. But the message of mercy offered the opposite invitation. Bring the very thing you are most afraid to reveal. Bring the regret you believe is too heavy. Bring the mistake you think defines you. Because those are exactly the places where mercy reaches first. By the following morning, the video had moved far beyond its original audience. People began sharing it on different platforms. Some translated parts of the message into other languages. Others created shorter versions and shared specific moments that had touched them personally. A simple recording that was never created to become famous had suddenly become something many viewers described as a source of hope. But behind this modern online moment was an older story. A story that began with a simple notebook and the handwriting of a young woman who, by ordinary human standards, seemed unlikely to carry a message that would one day reach millions. The notebook itself was not impressive. It was not a famous historical document at the time. It was simply a collection of writings created over several years by a young religious sister who lived a quiet and hidden life. She wrote while completing ordinary responsibilities, cooking meals, working in the garden, helping with daily tasks, and living the routine life of a convent. To most people around her, she was not someone the world would notice. She was not a powerful public figure. She was not a respected academic. She was not a well-known theologian. She had no obvious influence or position that would suggest her words would someday become internationally recognized. And yet, that was part of what made the message so meaningful to many people. The person chosen to record this message was someone who appeared insignificant by worldly standards, someone easy to overlook, someone whose life seemed ordinary. According to her writings, Sister Faustina experienced a series of spiritual encounters that she believed were messages from Christ. She recorded conversations, visions, and instructions that repeatedly returned to one central theme: mercy. But this was not mercy as a distant theological idea discussed only by scholars. It was mercy presented as something personal, urgent, and available to every person, especially those who believed they were least deserving of it. One of the most recognized images connected to these writings became known throughout the world. It showed Christ with rays of light flowing outward from his heart, one ray appearing pale and the other red. These rays became traditionally associated with symbols of cleansing and life. Beneath this image appeared a simple phrase: "Jesus, I trust in you." Only 5 words. No complicated explanation. No difficult requirement. Just an act of trust. A person at any stage of life could say those words. Someone full of faith could say them. Someone struggling with doubt could say them. Someone returning after years away could say them. Someone who felt completely lost could say them. That simplicity became one of the strongest parts of the message. However, the history behind these writings was not without difficulty. Like many private spiritual revelations, the Church approached the writings carefully. There were questions surrounding translations, interpretations, and certain passages that required deeper examination. The Church traditionally investigates such experiences cautiously because private revelations are treated differently from the central teachings of Christianity. Over time, after further study and better translations of the original Polish writings, the message became formally recognized and embraced. The devotion connected with divine mercy spread throughout the world, and what had once been the private writings of an unknown nun became one of the most widely practiced spiritual devotions in modern Catholic life. Understanding this history helps explain why the viral video affected so many people. The creator of the video was not inventing a new idea. It was not a modern motivational message created only for online attention. Instead, it was an old message being presented again in language that connected with people living through modern struggles. A message about being overlooked came through someone who was overlooked. A message about people believing they were unworthy came through someone the world once considered insignificant. And decades later, that same message returned through another overlooked place, a simple video on the internet that was never expected to become widely known. There is something deeply interesting about that pattern. The message itself has always focused on reaching those who feel forgotten. And once again, It found its way through ordinary circumstances rather than through powerful platforms or famous voices. Many viewers admitted that they had heard the phrase divine mercy before, but they had never truly understood what it meant. They assumed it simply meant that God forgives people. But after hearing the message explained, they began seeing something much deeper. Divine mercy was not presented as a softer version of forgiveness, where mistakes simply disappear without meaning. Instead, it was described as something closer to rescue. The writings connected with this devotion do not minimize human weakness. They speak honestly about the seriousness of sin and the damage it can cause. But the focus is not on the size of the failure. The focus is on the willingness of mercy to reach the person who has failed. One detail especially stood out to people who researched the message after watching the video. The idea that those who feel like the greatest sinners have the greatest reason to trust in mercy because they need it most. For someone who has spent years believing they are the one exception, the person who has gone too far, the person whose mistakes are somehow beyond forgiveness, this idea changes everything. It is not just a general statement saying everyone can be forgiven. It directly confronts the exact belief that keeps many people trapped in shame. The belief that says, maybe mercy is real, but maybe it is not for someone like me. And the answer given through this message is clear. Mercy is especially for someone like you. This is likely why the video reached people who normally would not watch religious content at all. It was not simply presenting information. It was answering a question many people carry silently. Am I too broken to be loved? And the answer was a direct and unmistakable no. But understanding the history behind the message is only one part of the story. The reason the video connected so deeply was because it did not leave the message in the past. It brought it directly into the struggles people face today. It connected an old spiritual teaching with modern wounds. Anxiety, comparison, loneliness, pressure, and the exhausting feeling of needing to appear perfect while privately struggling. And that is where the next part of the story begins. Because to understand why this message reached so many younger viewers, we have to understand the emotional world they are living in, a world where people are constantly presenting versions of themselves online. A world where everyone seems successful, confident, and happy on the outside, while many are privately fighting battles nobody sees. A world where the greatest struggle for many people is not a single dramatic failure, but a quiet feeling that they are simply not enough. And that is exactly where this message found its audience. For many people today, the struggle is not always connected to one major mistake or one specific moment they regret. Sometimes the burden is much harder to identify. It is the constant feeling of falling behind. The quiet belief that everyone else has figured life out while they are somehow failing to keep up. It is the pressure of seeing carefully selected images of other people's happiness, success, relationships, and achievements while privately questioning their own value. This creates a unique kind of shame. It is not always connected to one obvious action that can be corrected. Instead, it becomes a constant background feeling. A person starts believing they are not attractive enough, successful enough, disciplined enough, productive enough, or even spiritually strong enough. It becomes a type of exhaustion that is difficult to explain because there is no single event to point toward. There is only the repeated thought that something about them is not enough. The message from the viral video spoke directly into that hidden struggle, but not with the kind of encouragement people often expect. It did not offer simple motivational phrases or temporary emotional comfort. It offered something much deeper, the idea that a person's worth was never supposed to be built on performance in the first place. The teaching created a clear separation between two questions that many people confuse throughout their lives. The first question is, am I good enough? The second question is, am I loved? According to the message, these are not the same question. and confusing them creates much of the anxiety people experience. Many individuals spend their entire lives trying to prove they deserve love. They believe that if they become successful enough, disciplined enough, attractive enough, or morally perfect enough, then they will finally feel secure. But the message challenged that entire way of thinking. It explained that love based only on achievement is fragile because achievement can disappear, success can change, circumstances can shift, a person can fail, a person can lose things they worked years to build. But if love is based on something deeper than performance, then failure does not erase a person's value. One part of the teaching especially connected with viewers who were afraid of being truly known. Many people carry a hidden fear that if others discovered what was happening behind the carefully controlled image they present to the world, they would be rejected. They wonder what would happen if people knew about their anxiety, their private struggles, their unhealthy habits, their resentment, their regrets, or the parts of themselves they try hardest to hide. The message argued that this fear completely misunderstands mercy. Mercy does not require people to hide their brokenness in order to remain accepted. Instead, mercy begins when people are willing to bring that brokenness into the light. The very things people believe make them unworthy are often the exact places where healing begins. This idea also connected with another important point from the video. Trust is not simply an emotion, it is an action. Many viewers explained that they had always thought faith was something a person either possessed or did not possess. They believed trust in God was supposed to appear as a strong feeling of confidence, and if they did not feel that emotion, they assumed something was wrong with them. But the message presented trust differently. Trust is a decision. It is something a person can choose even during uncertainty. It is something someone can practice even while still struggling with questions and doubts. You do not always wait until you feel confident before you trust. Sometimes trust is the very thing that begins rebuilding confidence. This idea was especially meaningful for people who felt exhausted by the constant pressure to feel the right emotions. Modern life often tells people they should always be happy, motivated, grateful, positive, and in control. But the message offered freedom from that expectation. You do not need to feel forgiven before forgiveness can begin. You do not need to feel completely worthy before you are loved. Feelings can change, emotions can rise and fall, but trust can exist even in moments when feelings are uncertain. Under the original video, many comment sections became unexpected spaces of encouragement. People who had never met each other began sharing personal experiences and responding with kindness instead of judgment. Strangers were discussing pain they had never felt comfortable sharing with family members or close friends. They were admitting fears, regrets, and struggles to people they had never met because, for a moment, the environment felt safe. And the response they received was something many people seemed to be missing from their everyday lives. A response that did not immediately criticize. A response that did not rush to fix them. A response that simply acknowledged their pain and reminded them they were not alone. There was another reason the message connected with many younger viewers. It quietly addressed a growing distrust toward institutions, including religious institutions. Many people expressed that they were not necessarily rejecting the idea of God. Instead, they were struggling with experiences that made faith feel distant. Some mentioned scandals, hypocrisy, or moments when they felt judged instead of welcomed. But what stood out about this message was that it was not focused on defending an organization or proving a point. It focused on relationship. It presented faith as a person turning towards someone who welcomes them rather than a Message of mercy is based on the understanding that people approach God because they are weak, not because they already have everything figured out. The quality of someone's trust is not what makes mercy possible. The willingness to reach out is what matters. This was especially powerful for people who felt exhausted by the idea that they had to achieve spiritual perfection. They had spent years measuring themselves, comparing themselves, and constantly feeling like they were falling short. The message offered a different approach. Instead of asking, "Have I done enough?" it encouraged people to ask, "Am I willing to trust?" That change may seem small, but for many people, it completely changed the way they viewed their relationship with God. The video also introduced some traditional practices connected with divine mercy. It mentioned the importance of setting aside time for reflection, especially the traditional hour of mercy in the afternoon, and the prayer associated with this devotion that can be prayed using ordinary rosary beads. But it did not present these practices as burdens or strict requirements. Instead, they were described as invitations. They were moments to return again and again to the same truth, a reminder during difficult days, a way to reconnect with trust when fear begins returning. And that acknowledgement was important because the message did not pretend that one emotional moment would permanently remove every struggle. It recognized something very human. Fear comes back. Doubt returns. Old habits and old thoughts often reappear. A person can have a powerful moment of hope one day and still wake up struggling the next morning. The difference is not that the struggle disappears. The difference is that the person learns where to return when the struggle comes back. This was one of the most realistic and meaningful parts of the message. It did not describe spiritual growth as a perfect straight line. It described it as a repeated return. A person falls. A person reaches out. A person begins again. A person falls again. And once again, a person returns. Not because they have earned another chance, but because mercy remains available. For many people who had spent years trapped in a cycle of failure and shame, this was a completely different way of seeing themselves. They described a pattern they knew very well. They would try to change. They would fail. They would feel disappointed in themselves. Then shame would convince them there was no point trying again. Eventually, they would distance themselves further and further away from faith, hope, and even the people who cared about them. The message challenged that cycle. It suggested that the answer was not simply trying harder through personal strength. The answer was learning to trust more deeply. Because when a person believes everything depends only on their own ability to succeed, every failure becomes proof that they are hopeless. But when a person understands mercy, failure becomes an opportunity to return. By this point, the tone of the video began shifting. It moved away from simply explaining the history and meaning of divine mercy and started speaking directly to the individual watching. Not to an audience, not to a crowd, but to one person, the person watching alone at night, the person carrying a secret burden, the person wondering whether they have gone too far, the person who believes their mistakes have become their identity. The message became personal because that was always the purpose. It was never only about a theological concept. It was about real people, real struggles, real moments when someone feels completely lost and needs to hear that their story is not over. And that is where the story moves beyond a viral video, because every internet trend eventually disappears. Every popular clip eventually gets replaced by something new. Algorithms move on, attention shifts, and millions of videos are forgotten. But what people do with a message after hearing it can last much longer than the moment when they first encountered it. In the days and weeks after the video spread, a pattern began appearing in the responses. Different people, different backgrounds, different struggles, but many of them describing a similar movement from hopelessness toward trust. Some people talked about returning to faith after years away, not through a dramatic public moment, not through a sudden emotional experience, but through a small decision, walking into a church again, sitting quietly in the back, allowing themselves to be present without pressure. For some, that simple step was the beginning of a journey they thought would never happen again. Others shared stories about carrying specific regrets they believed made forgiveness impossible. They mentioned broken relationships, addictions, choices that hurt others, and moments from their past they wished they could erase. For these people, the message about mercy reaching even the greatest sinners felt incredibly personal, because they had always believed they were the exception. They believed forgiveness might be possible for others, but not for them. And hearing that mercy specifically reaches those who feel most distant gave them the courage to take a step they had avoided for years. Some even described contacting a priest or returning to confession after a long absence because the message directly confronted the fear that had kept them away. The fear that their mistake was simply too great. The fear that they had waited too long. The fear that they could never come back. But the message answered that fear with a different truth. A person is never too far away to return. Not every person who watched the video was dealing with one specific mistake or one major event from their past. For many others, the struggle was something quieter. It was the constant inner voice telling them they were failing, even when they could not explain exactly why. It was the daily weight of self-criticism, anxiety, and the feeling that they were somehow disappointing everyone around them. For these people, the message of divine mercy did not feel like an answer to one single crisis. Instead, it felt like a gradual change in the way they viewed themselves. Some viewers shared that they wrote the words, "Jesus, I trust in you," and placed them somewhere they could see every day. Not because they believed the words themselves were a magical solution, but because they needed a reminder. They needed something that interrupted the constant negative thoughts running through their minds. A small reminder that fear was not the only voice they had to listen to. A reminder that their identity was not limited to their failures. A reminder that mercy was still available. It is important to recognize that not every response was a dramatic transformation story. Not every person who watched the video experienced an immediate change. Some viewers honestly admitted that the peace they felt did not last forever. Some said old fears returned after a few days. Some still struggled with doubt and uncertainty. But this honesty actually revealed something important about the message itself. The purpose was never to create one emotional moment that permanently removed every struggle. The purpose was to introduce a way of returning. Trust was not presented as a one-time decision that eliminates every future difficulty. It was presented as a practice, something a person chooses again and again, especially during the moments when choosing trust feels the hardest. This is one of the reasons the message connected with so many people. It did not promise an unrealistic life without pain. Instead, it offered a different way to face pain. The struggle might still exist. The questions might still exist. The memories might still exist. But the person no longer has to believe they are facing everything alone. Across thousands of comments, one major shift appeared repeatedly. Before encountering the message, many people were living with one question: have I done enough to deserve forgiveness? But after hearing the message, many began asking a different question: am I willing to trust even when I know I cannot earn it? That change from earning to trusting became one of the biggest themes in people's responses. For years, many individuals had approached faith as though they were trying to prove themselves worthy. They measured themselves by their successes and failures. They believed every mistake moved them further away from God. But the message reversed.